What would you do, listeners, if I told you not all jesters were harmless jokers, that some played tricks with a taste for cruelty? Would you still laugh, or would you perhaps watch your steps a little bit more closely? I ask because this is exactly what many did when they encountered Tom Fool. They say laughter can be a form of power, a way to charm, to mock, or, in the hands of a certain man, a way to lead the unexpected into the shadows. Our story takes us to Muncaster Castle, a striking centuries-old fortress tucked into the hills of Cumbria, England. This castle was once home to Thomas Skelton, better known as Tom Fool, who served as the official jester during the reign of Elizabeth I. But Tom wasn't your typical jester. His tricks, they weren't always harmless. Welcome listeners to Podcast Folklore. I'm your host Kriss, and tonight we delve into the twisted, chilling and sometimes tragic world of folklore and legends. These stories that echo through time, shifting and twisting over the centuries, growing darker as they go. And tonight, our story is no different. A big thank you to one of our listeners, the Hanging Parsiple, for suggesting we look into this dark legend. Thanks to them, we're stepping into a tale where laughter meets with fear, and the line between prankster and predator blurs. This is the story of Tom Fool, the dark jester of Muncaster Castle. Who was Tom Fool really? A jester of quick wit, or a man with a darker calling? We're going to explore both the folklore and the facts as we pull apart the layers of legend surrounding him. But let's start with the basics. Thomas Skelton, as history tells us, was indeed the official fool of Muncaster Castle. He wore the typical garb of a jester, his colourful clothes, a fool's cap with bells, and a staff that, it's said, he had decorated with strange carvings. He played the lute and entertained the Pennington family who owned the castle. But unlike many jesters, Tom wasn't just a quick-witted comedian, and some accounts suggested he was well educated, perhaps even trained as a lawyer before becoming the Pennington's family entertainer. It is possible that he wasn't born into this role, but chose it instead, bringing with him an intellectual edge that might have often fueled his dark humour. But Tom's reputation didn't just rest on his wits. Rumours began to spread of his, let's say, creative cruelty. Imagine, listeners, a weary traveller lost in the shadowy woods of Cumbria. He comes upon a grand sight of Muncaster Castle, with relief flooding them. Maybe he's heard of the jester, a quirky man with a sharp sense of humour, and seeks his help. Tom would guide these lost souls, all right, but sometimes he'd guide them straight off the main path, sending them towards the perilous marshes of the River Esk. This is one of the most well-known legends, and it claims that Tom Fool would direct travellers into quicksand of the nearby Esk River. That's only if they insulted him, or simply if he was in the mood for a laugh. In the late 16th century, a time when the roads of England were treacherous, there were more footpaths and dirt tracks than roads as we know them today. The Lake District, with its rugged terrain, dense forests and eerie marshlands, were already a dangerous place for those who didn't know the land. On top of that, stories of highwaymen, robbers and even restless spirits made travel a truly daring venture. But if you're one of the few brave or desperate enough to venture through Cumbria, you'll eventually come across a glimmer of hope, Muncaster Castle, a fortress of stone, a place of refuge, or so you might think. And standing at its gates, watching the road, a figure dressed in bright, almost mocking colours. Thomas Skelton, the castle's resident fool, or as he was better known to the locals, Tom Fool. For many, meeting the castle's fool might have felt like a sign of luck, a rare moment of light-hearted relief after days of difficult travel. But for some, it would be their last encounter. You see, Tom Fool had a reputation. He was known for his cunning, his wits, and legend has it, his dark sense of humour. And while most jesters would simply entertain and make harmless fun, Tom wasn't like most jesters. Some say he was bored, others say he was bitter and cruel, that he resented those who wandered too close to his castle, seeing as them as nothing more than pawns for his twisted amusement. So when a weary traveller approached Muncaster Castle, seeking directions or even a place to rest, Tom would greet them with a sly smile and offer to help. Maybe he even exchanged pleasantries, told a few jokes to put them at ease, never letting on that he had anything but their best intentions. And just when he had earned their trust, he pointed them in a direction, away from the castle, away from safety. He'll tell them that if followed a particular path, it would lead them straight to the nearest village, where they could find food, drink, and a warm place to sleep. But the path Tom recommended was no shortcut. Instead, it wound through the treacherous bogs near the river Esk, where thick, sucking mud and quicksand waited silently in the dark. This wasn't just any marsh. It was a place that even locals avoided, a place where the ground could give way without any warning, swallowing anything or anyone that ventured too far from the solid path. The quicksand near the river Esk was particularly notorious, hidden under a thin crust of soil that looked, to the untrained eye, like any other part of the landscape. But one wrong step, and the ground would pull you down, inch by inch, with a grip that no human strength could fight. You can imagine the horror, listeners. A lone traveller, exhausted, desperate for shelter, taking each step in trust, unaware that every step led deeper into the bog. And then perhaps they noticed something very odd. The ground seemed softer and more unstable. Panic sets in as they try to turn back, but it is too late. They've already strayed too far from solid ground, and with each movement they sink deeper and deeper, and soon the only sound is the soft, relentless bubbling of the mud, reclaiming another victim. And somewhere back at Muncaster Castle, Tom Fool would be listening. Maybe he'd wait until he heard nothing but silence, and then he'd laugh. A low, cold laugh that echoed through the hills, a laugh that would freeze the blood of anyone nearby who happened to be hearing. How many fell victim to Tom's cruel directions? There's no way to know. History doesn't record the names of every traveller who went missing in those treacherous bogs, or whether they met Tom Fool before setting out. But locals, they noticed. They began to talk. Soon whispers spread through Cumbria. Warnings passed from one mouth to the next. Don't ask directions from the fool at Muncaster Castle. And yet there is something peculiar about this story, isn't there? It seems to hold a deeper warning. Perhaps it's not just about the Jester's cruelty, but about the dangers of blind trust. In Tom's world, people often judge others by their social roles. A fool was, by definition, a harmless entertainer. So when he smiled and pointed the way, travellers didn't think twice. They believed him, trusting that his mask of laughter hid no ill will. But Tom used that trust against them. He knew that people expected him to be foolish, silly, and harmless. And he twisted that expectation into something lethal, using his wit not to amuse, but to destroy. So, was Tom Fool a murderer, or simply a prankster who took things too far? Was he driven by cruelty, or maybe by boredom and bitterness, a desire to assert control over those who look down upon him? We'll never know for certain, but the legend of Tom Fool has left its mark on history of Muncaster Castle, a stain that no amount of time can fully erase. And here's the chilling part. Even centuries later, those bogs near River Esk remain just as dangerous. Every few years there's still reports of people getting trapped and sometimes even perishing in the same murky waters. It is a coincidence, or perhaps something more sinister. There are those who believe that Tom Fool's spirit lingers near the castle, watching, waiting for his next victim. Some visitors have reported hearing a faint voice near the bogs, a voice that seems to whisper, "Just a little further," like an echo from another time, drawing them deeper. A few claim they have seen a figure in Jester's cap, a ghostly silhouette standing just beyond the solid path, his hand outstretched, pointing the way to their doom. So listeners, this I ask you, would you have followed him? Would you have trusted the Jester, believed his smile and taken his directions? Or would you have sensed something dark behind that mask, something lurking in his all too kind eyes? It is a chilling thought, a Jester who turns his pranks into death traps. But the question that haunts this legend is why? What drove Tom Fool to this edge of cruelty? Was it jealousy? A warped sense of humour? Or was it something even darker? And maybe you're wondering, was any of this real? Historians tell us that Thomas Skelton was a genuine figure, and that he truly served as the Jester at the Muncaster Castle in Cumbria, England. Muncaster itself is a breathtaking sight, perched on the western edge of the Lake District, looking out towards the Irish Sea. It is a castle that has seen centuries of history, battles, feuds, wealth and poverty, all of it layered with a mystery. This castle was home of the powerful Pennington family, whose roots stretch back over 800 years, and somewhere in the midst of all this history, Thomas Skelton, Tom Fool, left his mark. But Tom wasn't just any fool. Unlike the Jesters you might imagine with their silly pranks and bright costumes, Skelton's story was different. The historical records suggest he may not have been born into the role. In fact, on some accounts claim he was a well-educated and even perhaps even trained as a lawyer. A scholarly fool, well-read and knowledgeable. It's an intriguing twist, isn't it? And it makes you wonder, why would a man of learning choose the life of a jester? You see, in the 16th century, the role of the jester was complicated. In the Elizabethan era, jesters weren't just clowns, they had influence. They were allowed to speak freely, often poking fun at their masters, offering insights others couldn't. And sometimes they held secrets that would make or break a family's reputation. The Pennington family at the time was involved in numerous disputes and conflicts with neighbouring clans. It's not hard to imagine that they rely on a man like Thomas Skelton, not just for the entertainment, but for his cunning mind and sharp judgment. Perhaps that's where his dark reputation begins. You see, Thomas Skelton wasn't just the Penningtons' fool, he was also their confidant, trusted with sensitive information, privy to private quarrels and family feuds, and maybe even entrusted with the task of best left unspoken. But what was life like for a man like Tom in the halls of Muncaster Castle? Imagine him, dressed in a garb fit for a jester, bright, colourful clothes with jingling bells, yet with the mind of a scholar. They say he had a carved staff, maybe filled with symbols and signs of deeper meanings, much like scholars and magicians. A lute strapped to his back for when he played the role of entertainer, but always with a sharp wit and perhaps an even sharper edge to his smile. He knew his audience well, he knew when to make them laugh, but he also knew when he could make them uncomfortable. And think about it, the educated fool, well-versed, respected and feared. Could it be that the unique position fed his darker side? We don't have many official documents or details accounting to his life, but what we do have is a growing list of dark legends associated with him. One tale suggests that Tom's education didn't make him clever, it made him bitter, resentful for those who looked down upon him for being a fool. And maybe, just maybe, his wit and intelligence became the tools he used to gain the upper hand. Was this bitterness the seed of his cruelty? Imagine him, a man surrounded by nobles who treated him with a mixture of amusement and disdain, watching them, observing their weaknesses, his mind always turning. It's a powerful image, isn't it? The educated man who plays the fool but never forgets his place, always looking for the opportunity to even the scales in his own twisted way. While these details are tempting, it is important to remember, much of what we do know about Tom Fool is still speculative. His stories have been passed down, whispered in hallways and shared as a local folklore. The Pennington family themselves may have told these tales, possibly to create a certain mystique around their own history. After all, what's more captivating than a fool who might have also been a killer? And while there's no documented proof that he led travellers to their deaths or poisoned his rivals, there is evidence that his memory was powerful enough to endure, and it was woven into the ghost stories of Cumbria. Generations later, people still claim that his spirits linger in Muncaster Castle, as though his wicked smile left an imprint on the stones themselves. Visitors are reported seeing ghostly figures in the hallways, lurking near castle gates as if waiting for someone to ask for directions. Some say the faint laughter of Tom Fool can be heard when the wind moves just right, echoing with a mockery that sends shivers down your spine. The records we have tell us that the man named Thomas Skelton lived and served as a jester. They confirm his connection to the Pennington family, and they hint that he may have been well educated. But the tales of murder and sinister mischief, of jealousy and revenge, those remain mysteries. They're legends built upon whispers in the shadows of the castle. Did Thomas Skelton truly live up to his name as Tom Fool? Or was he simply a clever man cast in the role of a fool, misunderstood by history and painted as a villain? Or maybe he was something in between, a man who walked the line between intellect and darkness, indulged in the power he had over others. That's the beauty of folklore, isn't it? We never fully know where the truth ends and when the tale begins. Maybe this is exactly what Tom would have wanted. And so, let us take a look at one of the dark tales. This is a story of obsession, betrayal, and maybe even a touch of heartbreak. This is the story of Tom Fool and Hellwise, a young servant girl who worked at the castle. Now, Hellwise's role is lost in history. Some say she was merely a maid or a kitchen servant, while others suggest she may have been a lady's attendant or a nursemaid to one of the younger Penningtons. Whatever her role, one thing is clear. She was beautiful, full of life, and she caught Tom Fool's attention. And when Tom sets his mind on something, or someone, he didn't take no for an answer. Hellwise, by all accounts, was young, perhaps no more than 17 or 18. She was known for her kindness, her gentle spirit, and according to the local legend, her striking appearance. In a dark stone castle like Muncaster, with its shadows and chill, Hellwise was a rare beam of light, a presence that warmed all those around her. Maybe she reminded the Penningtons and the other servants of a simpler, more innocent thing. A stark contrast to the cold, scheming Tom Fool, whose laughter always carried an edge of menace. But Tom Fool wasn't one to appreciate the innocence. He saw beauty and kindness, but he saw them as things to own, to control. At first, he may have tried to charm Hellwise with his wit, playing the role of the foolish entertainer, someone who can make her laugh. Maybe she did laugh at first, seeing only the mask and not the man behind it. But Tom's interest quickly became something darker. His glances grew longer, his jokes too familiar. His laughter was just a bit too intense. Hellwise began to sense the shift, feeling his eyes on her even when she was busy with her work. And then the gifts began. Small gifts left in her path. A ribbon, a silver ring, maybe even trinkets stolen from the Penningtons' own collection. Each gift was more elaborate than the last, each one a silent demand for her attention. Hellwise tried to avoid him, brushing off his advances, returning the gifts when she could. She maybe even appealed to other servants, hoping they could help her escape his attentions. But Tom was clever, too clever. He always found a way to be alone with her, catching her in dim hallways, a corner of the kitchen, always with a strange smile, a look that made her blood run cold. And then, as the legend goes, Hellwise found love elsewhere. A young stable hand, a kind, quiet boy who understood her gentle nature. His name, sadly it's lost in time, but the story says they were close, that he made her smile in a way Tom could not. They'd meet in secret, exchanging promises by flickering light of the servants' quarters, planning their future away from the castle, away from Tom's relentless gaze. But Tom knew. He had been watching, as he always did, observing from the shadows, a figure lurking just beyond the torchlight. And when he discovered that Hellwise had given her heart to someone else, that he had lost to a simple stable hand, something inside him snapped. Here's where the story turns from unsettling to tragic. One evening, when the castle was quiet, Tom waited for Hellwise as she made her way back to the quarters. He cornered her in a narrow corridor, hidden from the rest of the household. In a voice barely above a whisper, he professed his love, pleading with her to choose him, to see that he alone could provide her with all she needed. But Hellwise, terrified and resolute, rejected him. She told him that she loved another, that she wanted nothing to do with him. And that's when Tom's smile turned to a snarl. They say he didn't shout, didn't make a scene. Tom was far too cunning for that. Instead, he looked her dead in the eyes and promised that she would never be with her lover. If I can't have you, then neither will he. The next day, Hellwise's lover was found near the castle, his body twisted and broken as though he had fallen or had been pushed from the cliffs overlooking the River Esk. Hellwise was devastated. She was certain Tom had done it, that somehow he orchestrated the death of the one person she truly loved. But without proof, and with no one willing to confront the feared Jester, she was left alone, grieving, trapped under Tom's unrelenting gaze. Heartbroken and desperate, Hellwise avoided Tom as best as she could. She wandered the castle halls in a daze, her eyes hollow, her spirit broken. Tom, however, seemed undeterred, convinced that with her lover out of the way, she'll eventually come round to his twisted affection. But Hellwise had other plans. One night, unable to bear her grief or the Jester's lurking presence, Hellwise made her way to the cliffs above the river where her lover had been found. Some say she was hoping to find answers, to feel close to him once more. Others believe she intended to join him, to end her suffering in the same place he had met his tragic fate. Before she could reach the edge, Tom appeared behind her. Perhaps he followed her, or perhaps he sensed her desperation. He took her arm, whispering once more for his plea for her to stay, his promise to protect her only if she be his. Hellwise, unable to face the man who had taken everything from her, tried to pull away, but Tom wouldn't let go. In her struggle, she slipped, or some say Tom pushed her. And there, beneath the moonlight, Hellwise fell. Her screams echo through the night, swallowed by the darkness and the rushing river below. Her body was never found, but her spirit, they say, still lingers. To this day, visitors and staff at the Muncaster castle claim to see a young woman wandering the halls in a pale dress, her face streaked with tears, her eyes empty and lost. They say she is searching for something, perhaps a lover, or perhaps justice for the wrong done to her. As for Tom, his legend only grew darker. He lived on, unpunished, his cruel smiles as cold as ever, watching as each new servant girl with the same calculated gaze, as if he looked for another Hellwise, another life to control. Perhaps somewhere deep down he knew he would be remembered, not as the clever fool, but as the monster who broke a girl's heart, and with it, her life. So what do you think? Was Tom Fool truly in love with Hellwise, twisted as his love may have been? Or was he merely a cruel man, desperate to control, willing to destroy everything and anything that didn't submit to his will? We'll never know the truth, but we're left with the chilling reminder: love, in the wrong hands, can be just as dangerous as any weapon. And so as you walk through the quiet hallways of old places, remember, some spirits longer not out of anger or vengeance, but of grief. Grief so deep it binds them to this world. Hellwise's spirit, it seems, was never truly at peace, and maybe never will be. As we continue our exploration of the legendary Tom Fool, one story stands out, one that goes beyond simple trickery or jest. This tale reveals the cunning and ruthlessness Tom was capable of, especially when confronted with someone he viewed as a rival. It is the tale of a nobleman, the man who dared cross Tom Fool, and then paid the price. The exact name of the nobleman has been lost to time. Some accounts refer to him as simply as Sir John, a young and wealthy man travelling through Cumbria on his way to court. Others say he was a distant cousin of the Pennington family, hoping to establish himself at Muncaster Castle, perhaps even court one of the Pennington daughters. But regardless of his identity, we know one thing for certain: he was a man of wealth, confidence, and most dangerously, a sense of entitlement that placed him directly in Tom's crosshairs. Where Sir John arrived at Muncaster, he was likely expected to be treated with respect and even reverence. Here he was, a nobleman, accustomed to the best that life had to offer, surely expecting little more than a warm welcome and deference from the household staff. He probably didn't even give a second thought to Tom Fool, the man in the bright colours grinning from the shadows, watching with a keen eye as noblemen strode confidently through the castle's gates. Here is where it gets interesting. Tom was more than a simple jester. He was a gatekeeper, a man who knew everything that happened at Muncaster Castle. In a way, he was both an entertainer and a protector of the Penningtons family's interests, and when he saw Sir John's swaggering confidence, perhaps he sensed a threat, someone that could upset the delicate balance of power Tom had carefully maintained. After all, a man of means like Sir John wouldn't just be content with a polite visit. He would want more. And perhaps, as some stories suggest, he wanted more than just the castle's hospitality. The story goes that Tom quickly grew wary of Sir John. He watched the way the nobleman made himself comfortable, treating the servants with disdain, taking liberties as though he already owned the place. And then there was the matter of St. John's interest in one of the young women in the household. Some say it was one of the Penningtons' daughters, others believed it was a distant relative or even a servant girl. Whoever it was, Sir John's attentions were bold, and he made no effort to hide them. To Tom, this was more than just arrogance, it was an insult. This nobleman was acting as though he was entitled to Muncaster's people, its wealth and its secrets. Tom knew he couldn't allow such a man to linger, and began to hatch a plan that would rid Muncaster of Sir John's presence for good. Tom started small, planting seeds of doubt, a word here and there, letting slip to the nobleman that not everything at Muncaster was as it seemed. Perhaps he spoke of hidden treasure, whispering of riches locked away in the depths of the castle, jewels and gold waiting for someone clever enough to find them. He played on Sir John's greed, on his sense of entitlement, building a trap from which there was no escape. One evening, Tom approached Sir John directly, speaking in hushed tones as though letting him on a precious secret. He told Sir John of an ancient well hidden in the castle grounds that led to a treasure buried long ago, a fortune that the Penningtons themselves had forgotten. He told him that all he needed to do was follow Tom's instructions to the letter, and he would be rewarded beyond his wildest dreams. Sir John, intoxicated by the thought of hidden wealth and power, took the bait. He agreed to meet Tom later that night, under the cover of darkness when the rest of the castle slept. Tom led Sir John down a twisting path that wound through the gardens towards the old well hidden beyond the hedges. The night was dark, the moon shrouded by clouds, and every sound seemed magnified. The creak of tree branches, the rustling of leaves, the soft drip of water echoing from somewhere below. Sir John followed Tom, eager, his eyes bright with anticipation of wealth beyond his imagination. They reached the well, and Tom gestured for Sir John to look inside. "The treasure's at the bottom," he said, "just out of reach of those who lack the courage to take it." Sir John leaned over the edge, peering into the darkness, but all he saw was his own reflection, distorted by the black water far below. Tom waited, silent, watching as Sir John strained to see, hoping even to see a glimpse of gold. And then, without warning, Tom took a step forward. A simple nudge was enough to tip the nobleman off balance, sending him plunging into the well. Sir John's cries rang out, muffled and desperate as he realised he was trapped. The walls were too steep, the stones slick with moss and damp, making it impossible to climb. Some versions of the story say Tom stayed at the top of the well, looking down with that infamous grin, watching as Sir John's struggles grew weaker and weaker. Perhaps Tom may have called down, a nobleman like yourself could find his own way out. Or perhaps the treasure is only for those who belong in here. And with that he turned and left, his footsteps fading into the night. By the morning, Sir John was gone. Some say he drowned in the well, his cries unheard by anyone but Tom. Others believed he survived the night, only to perish slowly, unable to climb out or call for help. In any case, the Penningtons awoke to find their unwanted guest missing, with no signs of where he'd gone. Tom, of course, feigned ignorance, playing the fool, laughing it off, suggesting that he knew anything about the nobleman's sudden disappearance. But among the servants, a story began to spread, whispered in the corners and shadowed halls, a warning to anyone who thought they were entitled to Muncaster's wealth and favour. And so the legend grew, each telling darker than the last. They say that to this day, that if you stand by the old well on a quiet night, you can hear the faint echoes of a man's desperate cries, calling out from deep below, pleading for a rescue that may never come. So, was Tom Fool truly defending the Pennington family's honour by protecting Muncaster Castle from a greedy outsider? Or was this simply another example of his twisted sense of power, a way to remind others that no one, not even a nobleman, could threaten the authority he held in the shadows? We'll never know the true fate of the unfortunate nobleman, but it is a chilling reminder, isn't it? Sometimes the greatest danger isn't in the wildlands or the unknown roads, but in the people who watch us from the shadows, who smile at us with harbouring dark intentions. And maybe, just maybe, Tom Fool still lurks by that old well, waiting for his chance to defend his castle, or to take another life. Every legend, no matter how powerful, must come to an end, and Tom Fool was no exception. You might wonder, how does a man like Tom meet his end? Someone so cunning, so manipulative, with his secrets tucked away like treasures in his twisted mind. Well, the truth is a mystery as the man itself. There is no official records of Tom Fool's death. No documents detailing the day his mocking laughter finally fell silent. Instead, we're left with fragments, pieces of folklore that hinted at a fitting, if unsettling, end. One story says he died suddenly in his chambers, alone without warning. Servants found him slumped over as if struck down by an invisible hand. They say his face was twisted into a smile, as even though in death he had one last joke to tell, a joke that only he understood. Some whispered that it was the spirits of those he'd wronged come to collect him, dragging him into the shadows as he laughed all the way down. Others claim he met his end in a less peaceful way. According to some, the townsfolk and servants of Muncaster had grown weary of Tom's cruelty. The disappearances, the accidents, the whispers of strange happenings in the dead of night, these things that left a trail of fear and suspicion. Some say they took the matters into their own hands, catching Tom unawares, dragging him to the old well, one that he used to dispose of others, and there, in the cold darkness, Tom Fool met the fate he'd given so many others. His laughter, they say, echoed from the well one last time, and then fell silent. But the strangest tale of all, some say Tom Fool never truly died, that his spirit lingers in Muncaster Castle, as cunning and as darkly mischievous as ever, his laughter trailing down empty corridors, his shadowing flickering just beyond the edge of sight. The Penningtons have long since left, but Tom, he remains, a reminder that some souls are too restless, too twisted to simply fade away. So listeners, as we come to the end of Tom Fool's tale, I leave you with one last thought. History often reduces people to labels. Tom Fool was a jester, a trickster, and a so-called fool. But behind that mask, what lay hidden? Was he a monster, or simply a man twisted by circumstance? Here's what we know for sure. The tales of Tom Fool leading travellers to their doom or ending those who mocked him remain just that. Tales passed down through folklore and local legends. While he may have been a real man serving the Pennington family with sharp humour, history doesn't tell us if he carried out these dark deeds. We may never know of how much of Tom Fool's reputation was well deserved and how much was embellished by those who followed. Thank you for joining me tonight. Please remember to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell so you can join us again when we venture into more folklore. Your support helps us keep history and folklore alive as we become part of their journey through time. I've been Kriss, and this is Podcast Folklore. And just remember, sometimes the fools among us aren't laughing with us, but at us. Keep your eyes and ears open, and as always, keep exploring the world with wonder.